So we are back with Attachment Week, and we're going to talk about Reactive Attachment Disorder. In a second, I'm going to have you talk about that. But you, when I first met you, you kept saying I had attachment issues, which are not true. I'm heavily attached. Till death do us part. I'm very clear about that. Took me a while to get attached, but now you have what you want.
Yeah, you kept running away and breaking my heart for like 18 months. I used to call her the Black Widow.
I'm not a Black
And then
Widow.
fine she is. But then when
I'm not. Try and go away and you'll
got
find out.
her attached,
Right.
I call myself the Widow Tamer.
I am clear till death do us part, my love.
Right. She says the only way she's running is if she's chasing me.
Yeah, you're not going anywhere.
I love that, but it took a lot of work. And part of that came from your sort of anxious attachments.
Well, part of it came from, let's just be really honest, a really hard divorce and not wanting to do it again. But when I talked to you, you're like, well, you may have issues from, anxious attachment. So
what happened when you were a child that might have contributed to that?
Okay, well, so according to you, because I think I was fine. And then all of a sudden he's asking me these questions. I'm like, oh, wait, maybe there's something here. We were really poor. And I know my mom did the best she could. She worked a lot. My mom worked a lot. She worked 3 jobs. She was never home. I mean, like, never home. So she was gone all the time. And I would wake up in the middle of the night. She wouldn't be there. She was supposed to be there. She'd be working overtime. She'd be doing whatever she was doing. I would wake up in a panic. I mean, like freaking out, panic. I'd end up being hysterical. I used to go through the phone book. This is terrible, but I used to go through the phone book. This is back before we had cell phones. And I would go through the phone book calling 24-hour diners and having them page my mom. I was thinking maybe she went out and got something to eat after work, or I was so scared that something happened to her. And then all of a sudden, I mean, this really sounds morbid. This sounds terrible. But there's a point where I couldn't keep doing that. I'd miss school because I'd be up all night worrying about her. And she'd come in, she's like, honey, I was working. I was working like late. I didn't want to call you and wake you up. I'm like, you didn't want to call me and wake me up? Are you kidding me right now? So I'd end up missing school because of all of this. And like this happened over and over. And you'd think that eventually I would start to realize, but you don't, because she was all I had. My mom was all I had. So I would get so scared. So eventually though, I did start to change that. I mean, the sad thing is that eventually it does change. And so probably around 11 or 12, I started to literally, it's really morbid, but I started to think to myself, okay, so if something happens to my mom, what do I do? And I would literally visualize, what am I going to do step by step? Someone comes to the door and tells me something happened to my mom. What's next? I would visualize every single step, in detail, is my mom dead? And I'd visualize that happening. And then what's going to happen next? Who am I going to go live with? What's going to happen? What am I going to do? Where am I going to stay? What's my room going to look like? I mean, I would go through this whole process, and I would do that almost daily until I could tolerate it. I mean, that's what I would do until I could actually tolerate the thought of it. So it's really weird. But I mean, I don't know if other people have done that, but that's what I would do until I could actually stand the thought of it.
And you had a very ambivalent relationship with your dad, which we've talked about before.
Ambivalent's one word. Telling him not to ever talk to me again is probably not ambivalent. So.
Well, then he died in your arms.
He did, but that was many years later. As a teenager, I told him not to talk to me
So
again.
that's a little bit different than reactive attachment disorders. That is an anxious attachment, which I think is why you threaten my life constantly.
You can't say that on the air.
I always tell people if I'm dead, I didn't do it.
But it means he deserved it.
Reactive attachment disorder happens when children don't get the nurturing that they need, and they then don't connect properly. So, for example, a baby cries and no one responds or offers comfort. A baby is hungry or wet and they're not attended to for hours. No one looks at, talks at, or smiles at the baby. A young child gets attention only by acting out. A young child is mistreated or abused. Sometimes the child's needs are met and sometimes they're not, so it's unpredictable.
So I have a question. So when you're reading this list, my mom was actually very loving. She was amazing, but she wasn't there. And I was left with people who actually were not nice people sometimes that did many of those things on that list. So could that create it?
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be a parent. It just has to be
Like I had terrible
consistent,
babysitters.
loving
Terrible.
adult. But because she's gone and you had terrible babysitters, that's going to set you up for attachment issues. Now, you don't have this. You have, what we would call an anxious attachment. That's so much better. I mean, you're better than I think you've ever been. Early signs of an attachment disorder: child avoids eye contact, never smiles,
Yeah, that's something.
doesn't reach out to be picked up, rejects efforts to calm, soothe, or connect, doesn't seem to notice or care when you leave them alone, because it's this thing we call learned helplessness. They try and it doesn't work. They try and it doesn't work. They try and it doesn't work, and then they say to hell with it and stop trying. Later on, what we see is they have an aversion to touch or physical affection, control issues. They'll go to great lengths to remain in control and avoid feeling helpless. Anger, problems, difficulty showing genuine care and affection for others, and they have an undeveloped conscience, because our connections often help our frontal lobes to develop. And so I have seen many, many kids over the years with reactive attachment disorder.
So this sounds pretty severe. So I'm assuming that there are categories of attachment disorders and like which are worse.
Mild, moderate, severe.
And types that are worse than others.
Types like anxious attachment.
Which doesn't sound quite as extreme as this.
It's not as extreme. And, I first started seeing it after the crisis in Romania, where
all the orphans.
There were just thousands of orphans who'd been neglected, and they ended up getting adopted by Americans, and then the children were just a mess.
So when you were in medical school, I'm assuming you had to watch some of the same videos I did about monkeys when they put them in cages and they don't attend to them, and how they start ripping their own hair out and slamming their heads into cages. I mean, it's terrible. They'll die, but they'll often do things to like harm themselves. They create self-harm. If you take a baby monkey and you isolate it and you don't cuddle it, you don't nurture it, even if you feed it, but you don't nurture the baby monkey, what they do to themselves, they'll cut themselves and hit their heads on the walls, and it's really horrible.
Did you hear about this study? There was an emperor who wanted to know what's the natural language. It was an emperor in Europe. And so he wouldn't allow anyone to be around the babies because he wanted to know what the natural language, if children didn't have input from others. And he never found the answer to the question because they all died. That we require attachments in order for our brains to properly develop. The good news is there's treatment. What I often find is their brains are just so busy, and so as they've
it's like
been
extreme trauma.
Malnourished emotionally, they're often malnourished physically as well. So feeding them right, getting them to exercise, time can really help. And you have to work hard on the relationship. And when you have a child that's difficult, so I think, well, one, you should scan them to go, because often with this kind of neglect also comes abuse, and with abuse comes
abuse.
Traumatic brain injuries as well. And so,
But I want to clarify, that is abuse.
Yeah, of course it is. But I mean, traumatic brain injury kind of abuse too. And virtually no one talks about, well, we have to put their brain in a healing environment. So the food they eat matters, the boundaries that you give them in a loving way matters. So it's really optimizing the physical functioning of their brain. And then going back to time, physical time, so that you can become important to them. But
have you seen when someone has suffered that severe of an issue, as an infant, have you seen them ever be able to reverse to have a pretty normal life?
Yes.
Wow.
But it requires a lot of effort in our 4 circles. So you've heard us talk about the 4 circles. We have to optimize the biology of their brain and their body. We then have to actually help them develop empathy, and there are ways to do that. Connect them with social skills and then with their purpose in life. And so it really requires all 4 of those circles in order to help heal reactive attachment disorder. So know their brain, optimize your ability to relate with them, and then supervise the environment that they're in. Those are some of the big pillars that we work on here at Amen Clinics. Stay with us. Use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or on our supplements at brainmdhealth.com. Thank you for listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Go to iTunes and leave a review, and you'll automatically be entered into a drawing to get a free signed copy of the Brain Warriors Way and the Brain Warriors Way cookbook we give away every month.